Hi everyone and welcome to my Heartseeker Rogue Guide for Season 9. This is a build I've played extensively lately and I had a ton of fun and it's surprisingly good. So it's not the best rogue build out there, but it does do all the content very easily, including T4 lair bosses in seconds. And this is done here with my hardcore soul self-found rogue, so this can be quite a bit better if you really try. I took this build from Darkside, who has a maximum guide for this. I will show that off in a second as well. I also have my own planner here with my own spin on it. But overall, you can also take the written guide and it's almost the same of what I'm about to present to you. But I had a ton of fun with this, and if you're looking for something else on the rogue, then you can play this and, well, you can blast through everything in the game. Even all the way up to almost pit 100 or so is possible with this build, so you can get your glyphs up. You can speed farm like in the mid 70s range or so really quickly with this, and you blast through everything pretty fast, to be fair, considering what Heartseeker actually is. So even though you just shoot individual arrows that can only hit 2 targets maximum, you actually have pretty good AoE coverage, and that is thanks to the Pain Gorgers update. So this is one of the things that really elevates the build in Season 9, including this one, and we use the Say Rune Wolves that you can see here jumping around that apply the Pain Gorgers debuff to enemies, so you actually just hit the entire screen very easily. These wolves are really fast and aggressive, they jump into packs, cleave, freeze enemies, make them vulnerable, and like this you just have all of your damage buffs up, you hit the entire screen even if you just hit one guy with a Heartseeker, and you can actually run through those pits in sub 2 minutes in some cases. This build is slightly worse than something like Penshot, for example, which is like one of the top rogue builds currently, but not really by much. I've played a lot of Penshot and then I've played a lot of Heartseeker, and they were both doing extraordinary, I would say. And on top of that, the boss damage feels great. So especially if you stagger the boss, you just melt them because you actually excel at single target with this build. And it just kind of feels great all around. So let's get into the planner. I also have the Maxwell guide linked here by Darkside. As I mentioned, you can check this out here if you want to see the written explanations and a bit more details about everything here. And as I mentioned, I do have like a little bit of my own spin on a few things, but it's largely the same setup. I also took kind of the same Paragon boards here, the same skill tree. The main difference really is that Darkside, for example, has Victimize in most of the standard variants here, which is a buffed key passive in Season 9. It now gives you a 75% damage buff for 3 seconds after it procced, so that's kind of the main part of Victimize now, where it's kind of like just very comfy, and you don't really have to think about anything, and you can always stay at range, where, for example, I just went with the close quarters combat here by default. So this is like the more DPS option. You get extra attack speed, 30%, pretty significant. And you also get a larger possible damage boost by stacking damage to close enemies. We don't actually really stack anything, we just kind of get this number, the 80% here, by existing thanks to the Paragons. And I actually did not cap out this key passive, because it was actually worth more to just have, for example, Dark Shroud Tempers instead. But it is still slightly more than Victimize, and the advantage is it kind of like always works because the buff is on the character, where Victimize first needs to trigger, and for example on the first hit of the enemy it will not actually apply the 75% boost. So I just like the faster play style, and you just have to make sure that you activate this every 8 seconds. So usually with a Shadow Step, and then like a follow-up Heartseeker from close range, for example. You can also see all of the different variants here. So this is Darkside's planner, and I just kind of like added my own variants here based on those. So you can kind of compare them if you want to go back and forth. You know, this is the kind of more comfy variant, I would say, and this is like my like a close quarter variant here, and I also made like a slight tweak here for bossing, for example. So going through some of the key items here, Pain Gorgers Gauntlet is very important. So this is how you do AoE damage. So you apply the debuff with the wolves or potentially other skills, but you kind of want to automate it with the wolves. So like this, you can hit everything at once. This doesn't work with all of the damage multipliers that exist. Previously they were giga bugged and basically nothing worked. Now it's kind of okay, but it's still not working with everything. But it's good enough, and it actually clears stuff just fine. It also gives you more damage even on single target, for example, because even there you can apply this Pain Gorgers buff and then get like an extra hit every time you hit the boss, for example. So this is kind of the core. Then we have the Shard of Arathiel, also very important for basic skill builds. You also want to get, for example, resources here. This is thanks to the revoked adaptability aspect. You want to try to get a bunch of extra maximum resource, and this helps. And then we have a bunch of other like smaller items here. So you see, for example, there's Perdition and Starless, You can definitely get away with no mythics at all, and it's still relatively close in power because Call of the Nameless exists. This is a very powerful rogue unique. Trick Attacks is a very good passive, and this gives you like all the crit and crit damage, and it's actually not far off in terms of power compared to the Air of Perdition. And also a normal ring where you put something like Conceder or so is totally fine compared to the starters. It's just that it does cost a lot of resources here to actually fire the Heartseekers with Shout of Erathiel. So it goes from 0 cost to 25 cost. And kind of like one of the main issues you could run into is just running out of resources here. So you need to make sure that you generate enough resources. And this is done thanks to the innovation passive, for example. So we have this passive down here where you get a lucky hit chance to gain energy. And we actually have relatively high lucky hit chance on the Heartseeker. We also get 2 arrows every time. So you proc this on every attack basically, but it's not enough. And we also have the lucky hit chance to restore primary resource on one of the weapons. So this is kind of like the main way to get resources back here. And in addition with innovation, this becomes consistent enough to where you just never run out of resources. And as a backup, we can do reactive ooze. This is a season power where you get also 20% per second, as long as you trigger a catalyst regularly. And like this, you basically never run into resource issues. And in fact, we can go so far that we include the Quacks rune. So Quacks is a 100% damage buff for 1 second when it triggers, but it consumes all of your resources. So this is a very powerful buff, and you want to try to keep this up all the time. And we do this with Ahu. So thanks to the lucky hit chance that we have on Heartseeker, even on the boss, we can trigger this permanently, effectively. But it also drains your entire resource bar every time it triggers. So once the second roughly, all of your resources will go down, but we have this resource proc, we have the other stuff here, and you actually get to the point where you permanently sustain full resources, even proccing this rune all the time. Now, if you're just starting out and don't have the full combo, then I recommend leave out the Quacks rune for the start until you actually figure out your resources, but later on this is definitely not an issue. So just kind of as a tip here on the side. But for example, without the starter skies, your Heartseeker will cost double, so it will cost a full 25 instead of later it will cost only 12.5 because we get a 50% RCR here, and then you basically never have issues. But you should generally be able to attack all the time, even with the Quacks rune. There are a few other smaller uniques here. There's Penitent Greaves, since we actually have cold imbued Heartseekers thanks to the cold clip aspect. We can make use of this damage multiplier on the boots. This is very nice, just extra damage. And then for the mythics, we have the Air, the Shroud, and the Starless. So these are just kind of like a late game damage buffs to the build, and this is when you can really start popping off in like, you know, T4 layer bosses and like, you know, Pit 90 plus or something like that. But you can definitely play the build just fine in all Torment 4 content, even without any mythics, and slowly grind them up. It's worth noting that Heartseeker does rely on staggering bosses quite a lot. So you saw the clip at the start where I like take down some of the bosses, and you can do this without stagger. There is relatively high single target damage in this build, but on the other hand, once you stagger a boss, you do a lot more damage, like triple or something like that. And this is thanks to stuff like cold clip aspect and stuff like mixed cold imbuement. And we also have like various other like crowd control, conditional based damage multipliers on the Paragons and so on, frigid finesse. So this is like a typical rogue thing. You do a lot more damage when targets are CC'd, and this is no exception here. But at least the single target damage is so good that you can get away without it. And you can, for example, take down layer bosses just fine. Even Belial I can do in 5 seconds or so, and you can't really stagger him. So it is okay. But it's just something worth noting, especially when you push high in the pit. At some point, the bosses will barely be staggered anymore, and you kind of like hit a brick wall at some point. Some other important damage multipliers we have here is a Moonrise aspect on a two-handed weapon, 120% extra damage, pretty good. Also some attack speed and move speed. And then we have the Vehement Brawler here as well. And for example, earlier in like the accessories, we can put a Conceded. You can also put a Rapid here if you want to get some more attack speed. So there's a bunch of options here for aspects. And we have the Umbers here, so this gives us free Dark Shrouds all the time, so you don't have to put it on the bar. Some people have issues finding this thing. In that case, you want to put a Dark Shroud here instead of, for example, the Caltrops. It's not really like a requirement. I mostly just put this down on the boss or something like that, and otherwise don't really care about them. So you can just have Dark Shroud on the bar. This build also runs the Shadow Clone, so the Shadow Clone assists us in just shooting more arrows and hitting more stuff, so we have better coverage. It does do a decent amount of damage, not as much as it used to back last season, for example, but it contributes maybe roughly half or so of the total damage output. and it also gives us damage reduction, it gives us unstoppable, so that's pretty neat. And we actually reset this pretty easily thanks to preparation. So since Shard of Wrathfeel makes us spend resources with our basic attack, we actually trigger preparation, reset the Shadow Clone cooldown, and every time we press Shadow Clone, everything else resets. So you can use this to get more mobility from dash and shadow step. You can throw your caltrops everywhere, you can throw your smoke grenade everywhere. And like this, you have like a really good mix of mobility, defense, and damage output. In terms of tempers on your gear, you want to have one high roll of the Heartseeker projectiles cast twice. So this goes on the bow, for example. And even if you don't masterwork it to perfection or something like that, you can reach 100% with just that. You see here, this is 110% with only one masterwork crit. So this is very easy to reach that cap. And then we can put Shadow Clone deals double damage, so we help out the clone a little bit. And then we have that on the other weapon. And then we have Dark Shroud damage tempers, so this is kind of like the most powerful offensive temper in the game pretty much. Since we usually have 5 Dark Shrouds all the time, you have to take this number times 5, and there's a lot of additive damage you get here on all of the slots. And for resource tempers, there is Shadow Clone cooldown and there's Innovation. You can kind of go for a mix here. I have 1 and 1. Or for example, if you don't have starters yet, maybe you do another innovation, and like this you have like better resource recovery. And the Paragons look like this here. So this is like a beautiful Paragon tower here that Darkseid has built, and I basically just took like his setup here, which does make a lot of sense. So we have very important legendary notes here: no witnesses, 40% damage buff. You need to cast your Shadow Clone once every 10 seconds to maintain this, so make sure you do that. You also want to do that anyway through some other buffs you get from that, and just to keep up the Shadow Clone. Usually when I even cast it like roughly once every 5 seconds, so they do also keep the unstoppable, for example. Here's Eldritch Bounty. This was reworked in Season 9. It now just gives you a flat 30% multi for your cold damage. In this case here, with Cold Clip aspect, we do cold damage all the time. Plus you get extra maximum resistances. You don't need to have the cold imbuement on the bar anymore and stuff like that. Exploit Weakness. Since you have a very high lucky hit chance, this stacks up almost immediately. And then you have this 25% damage buff for a while, but it does cycle up and down a little bit. And then we have the Dance Macabre. This is just kind of like passively 30% bonus, basically. And then here for the glyphs, we have Control. So again, this is like one of these conditional damage multipliers, but it's very powerful. Then we have Fluidity. You want to make sure you use an agility skill every 6 seconds, which we kind of do anyway with dashing and shadow stepping and keeping up close quarters combat. Canny, non-physical damage, stacks up. Headhunter is just like unconditional damage, especially against elites. And lastly, versatility here. So this is mostly to buff the clone and also to get like this legendary bonus for extra damage and the magic buff here. So that's pretty much the entire setup. I do have another variant here for bossing specifically, where I did 2 small tweaks. So one is the boots. Since we don't stagger lair bosses, for example, the Penitent Grease is kind of useless. And instead I put mired sharpshooters here. So this gives us free vulnerable. You just throw down the caltrops and it shoots out these daggers and they apply vulnerable. And then you can also get a bit more dex, a bit more life, since the Penitent Grease doesn't really offer any stats at all. And like this, you have ranged application of the vulnerable, you have a bit more damage, a bit more life, and we also have caltrops duration as a possible utility temper. So you can just throw down the caltrops and it will last the entire fight if you have high enough DPS. And you can also easily overlap the caltrops. So I like that. And this also allowed me to get rid of the wolves, since we very easily apply Pango just now with the mired sharpshooter. And then I went Seer Wax. So we have a bit more damage output with the extra ranks. We get a bit more defense for Dark Shroud, for example. The Shadow Clone has a shorter cooldown, a bit more damage. So it's just a kind of like an overall nice combo to throw in here. And that made bossing very smooth. And that's also pretty much it for this guide. So you can check out a few more of the notes. For example, I noted some of the attack speed breakpoints here that you might want to reach and a few other like little details. Otherwise, as I mentioned, go check out the written guide here from Darkseid. He's done a pretty good job on this. And I know he has also been blasting this build quite a lot this season already, so you can also ask any kind of questions to him. But I had a ton of fun with the Heartseeker Rogue. I'm definitely going to play this more and hope you're going to enjoy it too. So, hope you liked this video, and I'll see you guys next time.